In 20 months, I made $3.2 million on a really niche staffing and recruiting agency. And we eventually sold it, and I was able to exit without even staying on for any transition period last year. And I want to teach you in 11 steps how I did it and how you can too. So the first step you got to do is you got to find your source. So for us, this was a Facebook group. The only reason I ended up starting this is because I had a partner at the time who had a Facebook group of 37,000 people in this niche. So for us, this niche was chefs and cooks. It was this massive Facebook group of people all over the country that were chefs and cooks, and a lot of them needed jobs, and there was a lot of people in there that were hiring for chefs and cooks. So we realized that there was this big need. So number one, I would recommend finding your source. This was our unfair advantage. Otherwise, you're really starting from scratch and you can't make the big plays that I'm going to describe later in this video. So a lot of people, the reason I actually made this video is because someone reached out that was in the recruiting space to me. They asked, how do you find your niche in this? And I think anyone who's trying to recruit for every niche is going to fall flat on their face and fail very quickly. So I do really think part of the key for our success was that we were so niched down. Whenever I would tell someone what area we were operating in, they would be like, damn, that's niche. And I think they were right, because chefs and cooks, it's a very specific area that people were trying to staff for. And I'm going to describe a little bit about who was trying to staff for it later in this video. Anyway, we found a Facebook group with tens of thousands, 37,000 chefs and cooks. And this became the source that we could later pull from, and also our ear to the ground of where these opportunities for staffing were. And both parts of that are really important. So if you were going to find your source, I would recommend that you do a Facebook group if you can. Now, the cool thing about Facebook groups, in the case of this one, it had never really been a business before. So I was able to partner with this guy. Even though he had this incredible asset, he didn't quite realize what it was worth, but he knew that there was opportunity there. So I was able to get equity in this company that was to be made because this Facebook group existed, but he just didn't really know how to make a business out of it. So there's opportunities out there everywhere. People have made giant Facebook groups with no intention of making a business out of them or no knowledge on how to. And so you can simply just make an offer to go buy them if you want to, start it on your own. Or you could partner with the owner of the Facebook group and just tell them what your plan is. And if they're not making money on it already, it's a pretty good offer. And if they say no, go to the next. So first thing I would do is I would start with your network, start with friends and family, see if any of them have a Facebook group. And not to say there's no other good sources for this, but a Facebook group is a really good, simple way, especially one with a lot of engagement like this one had. Another possible strategy for this, getting your source of staffing, could be partnering with an influencer that has a really big following in some niche that you have a personal connection to and some trust with. But I would still recommend the Facebook group. So step number 2 is you've got to create your offers. Now for us, we had 2 offers. One was staffing, one was recruiting, and I'm going to explain the difference between the two. So for the staffing aspect of things, we were doing short-term staffing where we would hire a bunch of people and we would place them and we would run all the logistics and the payroll, and we would make a little arbitrage between it. So simply, we would do 2 things. So we would have a billing rate and a pay rate, and these were negotiated with the client. So for example, let's say someone was going to be making $20 an hour as a chef, right? $20 an hour, then we might have a billing rate of $30 an hour. So that $10 an hour difference during the course of the time that that person was working for our client would be what we would pocket and actually make as profit. Now, that's the important part. You have to have a difference between the billing and the pay rate, and the markup for that is your service for finding people and handling the payroll during the course of the contract. Now, the big key here was that we were handling the payroll during the course of the contract because the client just didn't want to do all that. They wanted to have people come into their system, really help out for a particular length of time. For us, a lot of times it was, they were as short as like a week and a half or 2, and as long as like 4, 5, 6 months at a time that people were working on these contracts. So we would make a lot of money during that time. Now, the other thing is recruiting. So sometimes you have higher level positions and they could become permanent placements. Now, our ideal type of scenario was actually where someone started here with the staffing for like a short-term need, and then they upgraded to the recruiting. And for the recruiting, we would basically charge a percentage of their actual long-term salary for 1 year. So if they were gonna go on and make an $80,000 a year salary, we might charge like 13, 14, 15% of that or something. And that varies by industry, so you'd want to look into that. Now, the next thing that you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to actually secure your funding. So securing your funding, that is an often overlooked part of this, and certainly one that we overlooked at first because we didn't realize we were going to have to front a lot of this money for things like plane tickets, Ubers, hotel stays before the client actually paid us a lot of the time. So at first, the way this looked, when we got our first contract, we actually had to collect a massive, massive down payment. And luckily the client was willing to do this because they were down bad. They really, really needed people to work. But not everyone was willing to do this. And we figured that out pretty quickly after our first contract. So what we ended up doing after this is we ended up working with this company, and they were called TempWorks, where they would actually cover 90% of the payroll expense that we were going to have to pay for everyone. And sometimes different logistics like travel and stuff like that. Other times we would just put that on a credit card. And so they would cover 90% of it. And usually that 90% of the pay rate that we were gonna pay was more than enough to cover just that one pay part. And then the bill rate would come in from the client, and we would actually get that as well. And so they would front this money for us so we didn't have to have it in the first place, so we could go ahead and handle our operations and our payroll while we were waiting for the client to pay for us. Another thing I really liked about TempWorks is they handled all the billing for us too. And this was a massive headache. Me and my partner used to feel like literal loan sharks just hounding these clients for our payments because we needed to get paid to pay back what we were fronting in the first place. And it was really stressful at times. Like we had payroll to make, and that depended on us getting paid. So one thing I really loved is they had a whole billing department where we got a billing manager, and it was literally this guy's job to just hound our clients to get paid in a respectful way. And it really helped us collect better without having to worry about it. Now, they did collect a fee. I think it was something like 7%, which is kind of bulky. Like it's kind of a lot of the money. But because of everything they handled, they handled all of the payroll. They literally processed all the payroll and kept records of all of it, like helped us with all the logistics around it. And they also did this funding for us. It was really, really worth it. So I would look into different options for you. I liked TempWorks a lot. They kind of work as a Swiss Army knife for all different types, but they were a really good option. Now, number 4 is you need to build a pipeline manager. So for us at the time, if I'm being completely honest, this was just pieced together, and we're doing this on things like Excel sheets and all kinds of stuff. We were just keeping all these lists of people that were supposed to be working on these contracts or like were emailing us. It was a complete mess. But what I would recommend today is using a customer relationship manager of some kind, one that has a pipeline feature. If you want a recommendation for one, the one I would use today is called Go High Level, just because it's really cheap. It's like $97 a month. And if you're going to be making the kind of money we were making, that's an absolutely negligible amount of money. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to create all these automations where someone comes into the database as a contact, and I'll talk about why that's important later. It actually really would have helped us a lot more in the sales process. But someone comes in as a contact, and you basically build out like the stages of someone getting recruited, like from all the interviewing to like the processing of their paperwork to actual onboarding and all those things. And you can actually move them through that pipeline, and that helps you stay organized so that you can actually see where someone's at in the individual pipeline along the course of the journey. So I would build that through, again, Go High Level, and I would just customize that actual pipeline in the opportunities tab. There's plenty of videos out there on how to use Go High Level. I'm not going to go into that today, but I would customize that to what your actual process is. And that process is what the companies that are going to pay you don't want to go through on their own. So the next stage of what you're going to do is you are going to go find the big fish. So you need to find the big fish that are going to pay a lot of money. Now, we found this out the hard way because for the first 9 months of Chef on the Fly, we were trying to look for these small little jobs and just process a bunch of them. And it was a lot of logistics for every single job for a very little amount of money. We actually did not have any success in this. We were negative money before we actually ever found the strategy I'm going to talk about. And it wasn't until we actually found someone who had a lot of money to pay that we started making money. And this for us was a university. There was this university up in Chicago that had a really big need to fill a lot of staffing all at once for a short-term amount of time. They needed like 50 and then eventually like 65 people all at once. And so we got this huge contract for all of this work, and we were able to handle a lot of the same things all in these steps with a big group of people. And it was worth a lot more money to us, so we could hire people, bring on systems, start taking on expenses, and it was a much different deal. So you need to find whatever the big fish is in your industry, and it's going to be some like really established business most likely that needs what you're doing. Another example I'll give you is I have a friend that's in the physician staffing space, so like staffing for hospitals and stuff like that. If you think about a hospital, they make a whole hell of a lot of money. So they're willing to pay a lot of money to streamline their staffing. And they usually just bill all of that out to the clients, and in other words, the patients that are coming in. So because they have all that money, they're willing to pay a lot to save a lot of this work. So you should find the big fish in whatever industry you're in, the ones that have a lot of staffing need and that you could get big contracts with to actually do all of this. Now, the next thing you're going to do is templates. So this is a game of contracts. When you're doing staffing and recruiting, it's all getting these big contracts, and all of them end up being kind of customized. But a way that you could kind of simplify this, and what we started to do across the course of working with all these different clients, is we would make templates for different types of contracts. So we had a staffing template, we had a recruiting template, and a few different types of each. And what I would actually recommend using for this is something called PandaDoc. Now, we used a little bit fancier version of this, but in reality, pretty much any kind of contract you can need is going to be able to be done in PandaDoc. And the cool thing is it keeps you organized too. You basically like create your templates of different contracts, and then you create individual versions of them based on that template. So you've got a template to start with. It saves you a lot of the work of getting started. Then you create them for each client, and you can actually send them off to get signed through PandaDoc via email, and then you've got it stored for later. Now, this was really important because for us, it streamlined the operations of things. For us to spend all this time on contracts constantly would ultimately decrease the amount of time we had to do other things that were making us money. So the next thing that's really important is building your brand as you go. And this is important because this was a big reason we were actually able to sell this business. There's a few different things that I think really went into this for us in particular that made us able to do this. So the first thing was, social media is really important. And for you, any kind of staffing or recruiting that you're in, LinkedIn is a really good place to focus. But I also talked about Facebook earlier. The Facebook group is a really good strategy. So if you do choose that as your source of staffing, I would recommend growing on Facebook as well. So with social media, I would be sharing videos, I would be sharing tips, I would be sharing industry data, I would be sharing about the type of work you're doing regularly as possible, a few times a week or as much as you can manage, just to continue getting yourself in front of people for whom this could be relevant. You can find clients that way, you can find potential people that you want to staff that way. The other thing is you want to capture content of the work that's being done. So for us, we would get these huge contracts where there's a big group of people working. We would actually take trips out there sometimes to do meet and greets, kind of get to know the people, establish the brand a little bit more. But also we would capture video content of them working, photo content of them working, stuff like that. And ultimately, this allowed us to build a website around the actual work we were doing. Now, the other thing I would do is ask for reviews. So could be reviews, could be testimonials, Could be anything like that. But when you work with clients and when you staff people, you should be asking for reviews and testimonials so that you can actually put that content out there on social media, on your website, stuff like that. Because when people see that, they see social proof. They see that it's worked for someone else before and that it could probably work for them as well. Now, the next thing you're going to do as part of this is create case studies. So the way we would do this is we had a whole section on our website where whenever we would complete a job, I would have our operations manager actually create like a list, kind of a listicle type thing of how the job went, what the problem was, how we solved it, how the result went, that kind of thing. Keep it really simple, just so that someone can come on your website and see how it worked for others. Again, that's social proof. Now, another thing is awards and publications. So we actually paid like a couple $100 for this award that we were pretty sure was kind of a scam type of thing. But the cool thing was, didn't really matter to anyone. It was just something we could put in our email signature, and it said that we were like the best staffing and recruiting agency in Orlando, where we were based out of for 2022 or whatever year we won it in. We put that in our email signature and we put it on our website. And so all of our clients or potential clients would see that and see some legitimacy behind us. We also even got an article written about us at one point, and the guy that ended up buying our company actually saw that article, and that's how we got bought out. So stuff like that, building your legitimacy, ultimately just expanding your digital presence, those are the things that are really important. Now, the next thing is ads. So originally your sourcing is going to be what handles everything if you go big enough. For us, 37,000 people, it handled a lot. But as things went, this wasn't necessarily the most predictable thing. So you have to be ready for that and anticipate that. So we would supplement these jobs with things like Indeed ads and LinkedIn ads and like local area ads. So you need to educate yourself with videos and like articles and stuff like that on how to do Indeed ads and how to do LinkedIn ads, because these are the primary sources of where people are going to be applying for your jobs. Now, the next thing you need to do is identify leaders, right? You need to identify the leaders in your organization. For us, we got really lucky, if you want to call it luck or just foresight. There's one particular guy that showed a lot of leadership early on in one of the contracts. And so we honed in on that and we just kept promoting him over the course of these 20 months to eventually being the chief operating officer of the whole company. So he stayed in the company when we sold it. This was a huge part of the reason we were able to sell it and actually exit it without staying in it, because there was someone running all of the operations. Now, the other thing that I would say about that is you've got to identify them, but you've also got to move them through like a particular framework. At least for us, we first promoted him as a leader of staff on location where they were working. Then eventually we brought him internal into our office and had him running operations from afar. And he would actually promote other leaders and help them grow and help them manage people. So the next thing is you've got to secure contracts. So I talked about contracts earlier. All I would say here is do whatever you can to incentivize your clients signing longer term contracts, because that's the type of thing that creates predictability of revenue, and predictability goes a long way if you wanted to sell the company or if you just want to be able to predict your future cash flow. The next thing that you're going to do, and sorry, I forgot to update the numbers here, but step 11 is get an HR manager. So eventually you're going to need someone to really do this at a grand scale. And the first person we hired was an operations manager, but eventually he got too busy and we had to bring in an HR manager. And if we kept growing, I think we would have brought in more HR managers. So having these HR managers simply just allows you to do more scale and manage more projects. And it also removes you from the business so you can work on growing it more. Now, hopefully this was helpful, even if you're not starting a staffing or recruiting agency. Hope you learned some stuff for this. These are the same types of principles, many of them, that I use to grow all types of businesses now. So if you're interested in learning more, book a call with me in the link below or check out any more of my content, more of my stuff. I hope this helps you grow in 2024.